Alors, bonjour et bienvenue à tous. Je suis le docteur Carl Louper. Je suis le chef du département de psychiatrie ici à l'hôpital général juif. C'est un grand plaisir de vous accueillir ici en personne, finalement, dans la période post-pandémie, mais également avec la technologie qui s'est évoluée. Là, nous avons l'occasion d'inviter tout le monde. Je salue tout le monde qui se rejoint à nous en ligne également. Alors, tout d'abord, j'aimerais remercier le docteur David Dunkley, qui est le chair de cet événement, qui a tout organisé et le fait depuis pas mal le début de cette, aujourd'hui, c'est le 17e journée de la recherche qui démontre tout le travail qui se fait dans notre département et également dans l'axe psychosocial de l'Institut Lady Davis. So really, this is a very special occasion. It showcases the talent that we have here in research in the Department of Psychiatry. And I think this was really a perfectly selected topic, self-compassion and mindfulness. And without further delay, I'll invite Dr. Dunkley to tell you more about the day.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you all for attending. So big thank you to the Bassam Khoury Foundation for financially supporting Research Day for year after year since its inception. Anita David had generously supported our department's Research Day for the first 14 years, but she sadly passed away a few years ago, and her nephew, who's taken over, Norman Hacker, has generously continued the tradition. Thanks to Jean-Robert Simard and Oleimi Aoa as the research administrator officers for their support and assistance. Oleimi only joined us literally 2 months ago. I sent I think the few days before she arrived, I sent the email to Ashley, what about the administrative support? But she arrived a few days later and she's dived right in and is amazing and admirably taking care of all the important little details. And of course, thank you all for joining us in our first ever hybrid in-person research day. It's very exciting to be back in person, even in a partial format. And this is the first time since prior to COVID in 2019, so 4 years. And this is the 10th research day that I've chaired, but it really feels like the first time because of all the changes and upheaval. And yeah, I was supposed to be parachuted in here because I guess there's new renovations going on in the library that were supposed to start this week. And but that got pushed till today. So I have to be out of my office by the end of today, but for 4 to 5 months. But yeah, I came down here, saw Jorge, and just to have an in-person contact. And he had questions about perfectionism, self-compassion, and I've invited him to ask questions. He doesn't have to just be the audiovisual guy. And but he made a good point about it's good to break down silos, and that's kind of the whole point of Research Day, and kind of translating the knowledge. That's what Jorge was telling me yesterday into the general public. And so literally while I was writing these opening remarks yesterday, I have the former librarian Theodora. They're throwing out books, and I'm seeing Joel Paris's borderline personality disorder. They spent hours in that library. I ordered, looking at the book stats, how can they downsize them? And then I guess a lot of them just went in the garbage. But then seeing, seeing people screwing around, like research. I think it was your research assistants carrying this big box, and I'm thinking, oh man, I should probably start clearing out. It's like a raid out of the library. And but fun old stuff like holding the door open for people, as they're carrying out the boxes. And And then I'd never met Amy until yesterday. So this is, I guess she told me she's actually been over in the other building, but I saw the door open. So seeing the door open on the second floor for the research office, like I can't remember last time I saw the door open there. So I knocked and we chatted, and it's her first time, but I said, this is all about self-compassion, and it's a perfect topic for your first time. She's sweating today, I'm sweating, it's like we all sweat, but we're all compassionate. So but it's a fun story. She's from Nigeria, and I guess her parents immigrated here. She went to Concordia, so she's coming off a degree, and she's just excited, so all this, to be part of something. She's never been part of something like this, a research day. And so, I mean, to me, that's what it's all. It's infectious, that kind of renewal. And yeah, so so I thought, this is a good topic, months and months ago, about this self-compassion, mindfulness, and prevention, treatment of mental health problems. And yeah, I mean, normally I talk about my daughters. So I got 3 minutes till we, but last year I talked about my 17-year-old because it was altered states of consciousness that Michael participated in, and then she just gone to this big party with lots of alcohol and drugs and all that stuff, and people being in altered states of consciousness. Whereas this year I have my 14-year-old. She just made the flag football team at Royal West as a grade 8, playing on the grade 10 team. And she's not only that, she's quarterback. And so, this is great for, I think, for meeting various basic needs. Like this is kind of the moment she's been waiting for. She's got talents and running and throwing and passing the ball, and so she's meeting needs of competence. So it's not all just about mindfulness. This is kind of my point. There's other needs, relatedness, being part of a team, which I guess is certainly related to mindfulness, self-compassion. That's the first time she's been part of a team. And also some autonomy too. She gets to make her own decisions. As a quarterback, you got to make split decisions on the spot. Aside from that, the reality is she's playing with girls that are 2 years older than her, and she's a leadership position on offense, which has stressed and worried her. So I've had to do some kind of not formal mindfulness, but more informal stuff, like just observing her internal external experiences as she's playing. The rush of adrenaline and her heart pounding while she's running to elude defenders and sprinting towards the goal. She fell in love in elementary school. She said that was like the best feeling, when she's running away from you and just like feeling that that rush, or just even throwing a spiral through the air and just that anticipation as it comes down, hopefully over your receiver's shoulder into their hands. Acting with awareness of the present. Living in the moment, executing one play at a time, then executing the next play. That's all it is. It's one play. It's really living in the moment. Football's, I don't know if any football fans here, but it's all about living in the moment, not getting too far ahead of yourself. Common humanity. Initially, she's where I'm the quarterback. I'm responsible, but no, your experience is you're part of a team, a larger team, and you're trying to execute plays as a 7-person unit. You're all in the same boat of being experienced, because you're first team they've had since prior to COVID. So appreciate the unique skills and strengths that each player brings, whether it's size, speed. Here's a big one: self-kindness in instances of failure. So that's a big one. So I think we'll put that one off. But truthfully, that's, if you go to Kirsten, that's my self-compassion workshop. We do this exercise, and being self-compassion to yourself versus being others. And it's a lot easier to be compassionate with others, self. But if that fails, just be a good teammate. Be kind to your teammates. When someone, your other quarterback misses a throw, not with beating yourself up. And then finally, mindfulness, non-reactivity, holding these instances of stress and feelings in balanced awareness. Don't get swept away by your emotions. Stay positive, keep trying, especially when you're losing badly and when you're overmatched. You're trying to establish a winning culture by leading by example. So today I'm happy to introduce 3 researchers from the Lady Davis Institute who will present their research covering different perspectives, each bringing something new and unique and exciting to the table. So first will be Dr. Annett Koerner, who is Associate Professor of Educational and Counseling Psychology at McGill University and a regular investigator at the LDI. She'll present her work on self-compassion and emotion regulation. Next up will be myself. I'm an Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Associate Member of Psychology at McGill University, investigator at the LDI. And if I didn't introduce myself, I'm David Dunkley. I'll present my work on perfectionism, self-compassion, mindfulness, and depressive and anxious symptoms over time. Next up will be Dr. Soham Rej, who's an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at McGill University, Geriatric Psychiatry at the JGH, and regular at the LDI. Talk about his research on mindfulness-based interventions for depression and anxiety. And finally, we have our discussant, Dr. Bassam Khoury, who's an Associate Professor in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology, who will act as the discussant. And just a note that for those of you who registered, you can expect to receive an attendance certificate within the week. And for those of you who are attending and would like a certificate, please register. And also, please complete the evaluation form for today's talks. The Google form link was emailed to you yesterday by Amy, or you can scan the QR code at the end of each presentation. Okay, what do we got? All right, so first up is Dr. Annett Koerner, who is an Associate Professor in the Department of Counseling Psychology and Associate Member in the Department of Oncology at McGill. Dr. Koerner holds an appointment as a Research Associate at the Lady Davis Institute and the Research Institute of the MUHC. She completed her training in clinical and health psychology at the University of Leipzig, Germany, and she did an Udding Fellow here at the ICFP. And she completed a doctoral and postdoctoral fellowship in the psychotherapy research unit with Dr. Perry. And her earlier research focused on psychodynamic psychotherapy and interpersonal functioning. And then she also has practiced as a licensed psychologist in the departments of psychosomatic medicine at the universities of Leipzig and Freiburg, Germany. And then in 2003, Dr. Koerner moved to Canada, and her lab has conducted research on the behavioral prevention of melanoma, couples coping with cancer, and self-management interventions for patients with life-threatening diseases. So today we're going to learn more about her work on self-compassion as a protective buffer, and she's currently conducting a study together with research partners in Germany and the Netherlands to gain a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms. So a warm welcome to Dr. Koerner. So a warm welcome to Dr. Koerner.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for having me. I thought I'd take you with me today on my journey through self-compassion, through the self-compassion world, because I mean, for a long time, I hadn't heard anything about it. I was looking for a measure on self-criticism and boop, self-compassion came up, and I thought, wow, self-compassion, who can't use a bit more self-compassion? Why are always looking at the pain? So this is how it started for me. But I thought, well, thank you, David, for introducing me. And yes, I am an import from Germany. I am German, but I wanted to say, like, in my heart, I'm East German. Always will be. And I know. And I'm so grateful the wall came down. I mean, no one thought that would, I mean, I didn't think it would happen. I mean, no one that I knew thought it would ever happen. And everything changed. Yeah, I ended up over here. And here you can see, like, I think it's kind of his fault. That's Lester Luborsky, and he's a US American researcher in the psychodynamic field. He came up with a method to assess transference, and I used that method for my dissertation. You can also use it to assess relationship patterns. Yeah, and this is a colleague from the team over here. He was working at the time at the ICFP in the psychotherapy research unit.
Annette,
yeah.
I'm just sorry. We only see the poster for Research Day still. And I'm not sure if that's other people see that.
No, I see Dr. Koerner.
You do? Okay. Well, then it's just my mistake. Okay.
Yeah, you'll have to reduce your screen, I think, yeah.
I see. Yeah, the shared screen, yes, was
Okay.
Dr. Koerner's, was the Research Day poster. I'm just saying we don't see your slides right now.
Did we stop share and share again?
He's right. We don't see anything.
There. Okay. Perfect.
So now you see my beautiful East German pictures.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, so from the Berlin Wall to Canada. And like I said, I used this method that came from North America, and then I connected with the team here at the ICFP who also used Luborsky's method, and I ended up here, and I learned to rate defense mechanisms and therapeutic interventions and the Ericksonian fears and wishes. And somehow, yeah, I really ended up over here, and I moved here, and I did a postdoc here. And I'm still connected to the LDI, even though then I was hired at McGill in counseling psychology. And I'm co-directing a research lab on science and practice in psychology with Martin Drapeau. And some of the work that I'm showing today is funded by SHRC. Yeah. So, and here's my agenda. I thought I would first talk with you a bit about defining self-compassion. How is it conceptualized? Because that has also an impact on how we measure this construct. And measurement, of course, determines in a way also the research that we can do and the research findings. Oh yeah, and yeah, come with me in my time machine. We're not going back to Buddhism. Maybe Dr. Khoury will go there. I just wanted to have a look with you at self-compassion in Western psychology, because again, before Neff, I wasn't aware of that. And then I started to look into it. And it seems that people did think about this before Kristin Neff, but not necessarily called it the same. So here you first see Albert Ellis. He was basically credited with coming up with the first cognitive behavioral therapy, an important theoretician, and he coined the term unconditional self-acceptance. And the way he describes it, like accepting yourself in the good and in the bad, no matter your faults, in the end, you are a worth human being. Which sounds to me a lot like self-compassion. Then Maslow, well, very famous Maslow, positive psychology, a hero. He advocated for non-judgmental, forgiving self-acceptance in response to psychological pain. Another researcher, clinician, Judith Norton, she defined self-empathy, and she described it as a corrective experience with oneself in which aspects of the self that were previously rejected are now accepted, and you respond to them in a caring, affectively present, and reconnecting manner. Even in psychodynamic therapy, the idea of self-compassion was there. And I mean, I found only McCullough who actually called it self-compassion. And she describes it as compassionate self-appraisal, allowing the person to experience sufficient affection and care for oneself, which helps regulating and offsetting the effects of painful emotions. Then, of course, there's Paul Gilbert. He developed compassion-focused therapy and even had already kind of a measure of self-compassion. It was kind of hidden behind the criticism. It was like self-criticism and self-reassuring scales. And he is not just focused on self-compassion, but compassion for others and the self. And he defined it as being sensitive to the suffering in oneself and in others, but with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. And then, of course, Kristen Neff, she put self-compassion on the map. And she often explains it by referring to compassion for others and says, hello, what do you do if you notice that being, what does it evoke in you? I mean, normally you feel with them and you care for them and you understand them. And how about you do this to yourself? How about you turn this inward? And in 2003, she published 2 papers, one where she more theoretical and then one on a measure. From there, I took how she defines it more in detail. And she says, self-compassion, that means to be kind and understanding toward myself when I feel pain or failure, rather than being partially self-critical and judgmental. She also made the point that self-compassion entails to realize that my inadequacies and my suffering, my pain is part of a shared human experience. It doesn't isolate me from others. It doesn't separate me. And then she emphasized self-compassion also means that I can feel the pain, that I can keep it in a balanced awareness rather than over-identifying with it and fixating on it and just thinking about everything that's wrong. So she didn't just give us a definition, she gave us a measure. And we can't study what we can't measure, but now we could measure it. And I'm showing you here some example items. So basically we have the 3 components of self-compassion. And for self-kindness, he came up with items like, I'm kind to myself when I experience suffering, but I'm not, or I am, the item actually reads, I'm disapproving and judgmental of my own flaws and inadequacies. For common humanity, here an example item, when I feel inadequate in some way, I try to remind myself that feelings of inadequacy are shared by most people, versus when I fail at something that's important to me, I tend to feel alone in my failure. And lastly, for mindfulness, when I fail at something important to me, I try to keep things in perspective, versus when I'm feeling down, I tend to obsess and fixate on everything that's wrong. Well, she developed the measure, ran different steps, ran factor analysis, and then it so happened that she couldn't really find that it was 3 dimensions, and that each dimension had like one end, like self-kindness, and at the other end of the continuum self-judgment. Instead the data showed it's 6 separate factors, 6 separate subscales, which were called self-kindness. You see the names there. And then she proposed also to create a total score of the scale for which she would reverse score the items that were asking about negative experiences. And then self-compassion conquers the world. And I mean, since she published this, we have more than 3,800 papers on self-compassion in peer-reviewed journals. And they showed that self-compassion is associated with stress resilience, creativity, job satisfaction, positive romantic relationships, getting through a marital separation, more well-being, less psychopathology. And then, of course, interventions are being developed to foster self-compassion, also like Gilbert's group, Compassion for Others. And that's not just for clinical populations, but also for non-clinical populations, like people who want to improve and feel better in everyday life. So we also were curious and excited, and we wanted to know, does self-compassion protect against depression? And so it was a cross-sectional study, which is a limitation, but we wanted to see, does self-compassion differ depending on the level of depressive symptomology? And which of the sub-constructs of self-compassion predict depressive symptoms? We were lucky to get a general population sample, more than 2,000 people, because a lot of research, at least at the beginning, was also done with students. So I mean, that's the people you can torture with your questionnaires. That's where you start. So we thought, well, let's see how it is for the general population. So we used the patient health questionnaire, the PHQ-9. It assesses depressive symptomology. It also comes with algorithms to determine if someone is likely to have major depressive disorder, or if someone has another depressive disorder. Yeah, and we had the self-compassion scale, so we used the 6 subscales and the total score. And then when we compared the people who had no depressive symptoms at all with those who reported or who are likely to have any other depressive syndrome versus those with major depressive disorder, they significantly differed, like from here to here, like all the groups differed. More self-compassion towards less self-compassion with those who suffer most from depression. I'm sparing with the individual scales, but I have a slide at the end if you want to look at that. So here I'm now showing you a composite score across the 3 positive subscales, or all the items that made up all the positive items versus all the negative items. I wasn't sure how to call it, but self-compassion composite, because in a way it seems like that's the essence, like the items that actually describe a compassionate way of dealing with myself, attending to myself, versus the items that ask about being harsh and judgmental and getting down and feeling alone, and yeah, everything is wrong. And strangely, we found what we didn't want to find, which was so surprising, and in contrast to the research I had read before, the self-compassion. I mean, you can see the scores do go down, but no significant differences between people depressed or not depressed. But there were significant differences between people without any depressive symptoms and depression versus major depression. Strange. I know. Did the Germans get it wrong? So then we looked at the predictors. So we wanted to know, like, which of the subscales are the best predictors of depression. And isolation came out as the winner. Isolation explained 18% of the variance in depressive symptoms. And all the other subscales, they either did not or they contributed 2%, 1%. So I took a closer look. I mean, what's going on here? And here I'm showing you the Pearson correlations with depressive symptoms. And as you can see, like if the 6 subscales, like I grouped them now by positive subscales and negative subscales, only self-kindness kind of was significant, which you can also question in such a large sample. It's likely that such a, I mean, 0.08 was, what is that? But we ever had a large, became significant. But if we group, if I create the mean across all those items, no correlation with depression, but the self-coldness, I mean, I don't know if self-coldness is the best word, but the negative items correlate at 0.45. And then the total score correlates. So I looked at the literature because there was a meta-analysis on self-compassion and psychopathology, but I didn't look close enough. Now I looked and all the research was on the total score. And now I pulled the individual studies and not all reported subscale findings, and some who did, some found results similar to mine, but others did find that the positive subscales contributed. Yeah, then there was a meta-analysis on self-compassion and well-being, and again only on the total score. And I emailed the author, and he said, well, barely anyone reports on the subscale scores. Everyone who publishes on the total score. But not everyone. So I wanted to show you another study by Brenner, who I guess she had the same experience like me, or she read, oh my God, 5 minutes. Oh my God, 5 minutes. Sorry. Forget it. Okay. Community sample, student sample. But basically, self-compassion did not explain distress. Self-compassion explained well-being, and self-coldness explained distress. Let me flip through these slides. Oh, okay, my God. Another meta-analysis. So, I mean, what is this thing if people just report the total score, and the total score could be misleading? Now, this guy, Morris, he found 18 studies who reported also the subscale scores, and he compared the correlations. So on average, self-kindness correlated with psychopathology negatively at 0.34 and self-judgment at 0.47. So point is the positive subscales do relate to psychopathology, but the negative relates stronger. And I wonder how these numbers would look like if everyone would report on subscale scores. So I have the suspicion that if you don't find something, you might be tempted to stick to the total score. 5 minutes, I can't believe this. What do I do? Okay. Again, I think the total score can be misleading, and there's discussion about self-judgment sounding a lot like harsh self-criticism, isolation, I mean, like withdrawal and loneliness, over-identification. I mean, fixating on everything that's wrong. That sounds like mental health problems or things that lead to mental health problems. So I would think that including the negative items in the total score will comes with the risk of overestimating the relationship. But again, I mean, even the positive aspects, they did relate, that there was an association. So why don't we try to figure that out and understand that relationship rather than inflating it or contaminating it by assessing psychopathology at the same time, reversing it and then correlating it with psychopathology. There was an argument for a long time. Well, but this is how we define self-compassion. We define it as being kind and not being judgmental. I'm saying, well, no one ever was able to show factor analytically that this is a continuum. Yeah. Okay. That's your default has changed. Can you still hear me online? Oh.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. So there is research out there on emotion regulation. It's starting, still a lot with the total score, but our moderator also looked at the differential impact, and we are trying, to date we have 517 psychotherapy patients, and we want to run these models to see emotion regulation skills, how are they related to the different aspects of self-compassion. We also want to check this model, repeat Brenner's model, which because now it's a clinical sample and she did it in students and community. Alternate measures, at least this I have to tell you so quickly. Yeah, so there are, okay, so there are other measures that you could use. Both were developed in the UK. And quickly, there are the compassionate engagement and action skills by Gilbert. I spoke about the definition before. He also stresses that, that there are two subcomponents. One is noticing and tolerating the suffering, being moved by it, and the other one is acting on it or having the motivation to act on it. So he actually offers us 3 scales: one for compassion for others, one for compassion from others, and compassion for the self. And for each one, he subdivides them into being moved by the suffering versus being motivated to do something about it. He had large samples. It's 10 items per scale, which kind of match each other. The reliabilities look good, constructability looked good. The same basically for this, the SUSSEX-OXFORD compassion scales, a team around Jennifer Gu. They did a theoretical and empirical review and came up with these 5 aspects of compassion. Quick. They defined 2 scales: compassion for others and compassion for the self. They had students and healthcare staff 10 items that match good reliability, constructability, and then we translated them to German and to French. And we validated them like in okay size samples. Internal consistency, confirmatory factor analysis could confirm the scales, not all the subcomponents, but the main scales were the same, and most of the subcomponents in most subscales were fine. And there were meaningful associations, like we would expect with the self-compassion scale, with the stress, with pro-social behavior intentions. So here I have the references and I can send them to you. The French version is under review. The German version is not published yet, but I can send you a poster. Quickly. Interventions. 3 meta-analysis. And maybe I do not tell you all the details. You could read them and you have the references. But basically the story is there are interventions being developed. They try to include interventions that focus on self-compassion. But I put it in parentheses because apparently the interventions that they did include did not necessarily focus on self-compassion. Like often it was, I don't know, it was another intervention with an add-on, like emotion-focused therapy with add-on imagery for compassion, or mindfulness-based stress reduction with an add-on, acceptance commitment therapy with an add-on. The outcomes, well, there were effects. They could show even moderate effects, but most often when compared to waitlist control groups, the benefits were not necessarily greater when you compared it to active control groups, active control interventions. You have to say, but they're kind of all in the, this research field is in its infancy. So a lot of it is pilot trials. I mean, N of 9 and 11 compared to each other. Yeah, so, well, it seems like there is promise, but we need to keep going. Well, we need to keep going. Conclusions. The Holy Grail, is it the Holy Grail? 3 points, self-compassion scale. I don't know if you want to assess self-judgment, isolation, and being consumed by negativity, and then reverse scores it and add it to self-compassion. I wouldn't do it, but it's your choice. I think we should separate it. And when you read research, read the small print. But don't forget, I mean, self-compassion is beneficial. I mean, even if we separate it. But we can't really find out if we contaminate it. And well, there are alternative measures. I don't know if they work better than a self-compassion scale. I mean, you could also just use the 3 positive subscales, like the items, the 13 items that make up actual self-compassion. Some research do that. Some researchers do that. And for interventions, I feel like there are more questions than answers yet. Self-compassion can be increased, also by interventions that do not focus on self-compassion. We need more rigorous research to know if a self-compassion focus leads to superior outcomes. So I'm looking forward to see that work. But I think we don't get around the pain. Like attending to the pain, like I'm supervising a lot of students, and when the patient doesn't change and they all love self-compassion, like let's give the patient a book, let's do self-compassion, let's do self-compassion. It's not just me. I think there's a lot of research, and I can't show you all the evidence, but I think also Kristen Neff, that's her point. I mean, it's about noticing the pain, tolerating the pain, going there, and respond with self-compassion. And that's it. And thank you for your.
Thank you, Dr. Koerner. And yeah, we have time for a few minutes of questions. And I apologize because I realized when you give a time limit to an East German, it's like, oh my. I saw the panic and I was like, this feels so bad.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Well, you took, yeah, mentioned at the beginning. Anyways, do people have questions? First to look in the audience. Okay, and what I see someone in the chat. Oh, sorry, yes.
Sure. Just my question, it feels to me like that self-compassion is also related to self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
But I didn't see it anywhere in the definitions. I was wondering, what's your take on the relationship between forgiveness and
Maybe repeat that.
Yeah. So the question is, self-compassion sounds like it would be related to self-forgiveness, but we didn't see it in the definition. Well, I would think like if I react understanding and kind toward myself when I fail or when I do something wrong, that sounds like forgiving myself. There has been also research on being afraid to let myself off the hook by acting with self-compassion. From what I have seen, that's not the case. Then it's not really self-compassion. And yes, I think either self-compassion, I think it should be highly correlated with forgiveness. Yeah, but it sounds also that maybe self-compassion is a bit more, like at least how it is defined here, like the awareness of the pain and realizing that I'm not alone in this. Self-forgiveness, you could define narrow if you want. Yeah, but certainly related and part of it. I mean, that's the thing in psychology. So many things are related.
Time for one more question. Okay, we'll do 2 more.
Self-validation. Validation of one's own emotional experience. Yeah, Yeah, I do see a relation between self-compassion and self-validation. From my understanding, self-compassion entails that I notice what I feel, and in a way that I validate myself, my experiences as, yes, they're there, and I attend to them. What I do, well, I guess validation is the next step, because self-compassion is maybe more noticing it and understanding it. But then what I do with it would maybe be the next step, validation. Again, I'm sure it will correlate.
Okay, so one more question.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I apologize, I came in early, so I don't know if you've covered this before. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence, even with just a few subjects, of changes in imaging when people speak positively about themselves.
In imaging, you mean in brain images?
Yes, yeah, like with functional brain imaging, yeah,
um,
scans or anything, yeah.
I don't know that literature, but I know that Paul Gilbert also looked at imaging, and there was another publication that I read a while ago. So I mean, they made the case that there is something there, but I don't remember, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Quick.
Sure. Why not?
Okay, would you, and the test or the scales that you use, would you consider them culture fair or culture free?
Oh. Well, I mean, I think it is developed within the North American culture, or the UK culture. Like I think so they are not culture free, and I even wonder how they apply to, let's say, average Joe. And maybe I have an example. Before I realized that the Austrians had already translated the self-compassion scale, I tried to translate it, and it was so painful. I wanted to change all the items because I thought my father would never, my sister, my neighbor, they would think, what is this crazy item? And this is, listen, when I'm going through a very hard time, I give myself the caring and tenderness I need. I wonder how a normal person thinks about that. And I'm wondering if that was also a problem in our general population sample, because people don't think about this way. That's and when I looked at the sub-studies from the meta-analysis, it seemed to me that it was more the students, of course, and the more psychologically minded people, like who go to psychology websites and then fill out a survey, or patients who had been exposed to this kind of thinking. It seemed like more valid, there we found what we expected. And so it doesn't really respond to culture, but there are limitations maybe. And the new measures, oh, these items, read them. I mean, you find they work, but it's a different mindset a bit. And maybe it's good. I think that's also something we can credit Kristen Neff with, to bring this to the rural, to the general population. When I was a student, I wanted to send my father and my neighbor and my teacher. I wanted to send them all to psychotherapy. You know? I thought you could have such a better life. But maybe we don't all need psychotherapy, but a little bit more self-compassion. Yeah. Now I'm in overtime.
That's fine.
So, hi everyone. So I'm Soham, and I'm here to, actually, I'm really happy you asked me to do this. So I'm here to present Dr. David Dunkley. So he is a senior researcher with the Lady Davis Institute and the Jewish General Hospital, and an associate professor of psychiatry and an associate member of psychology at McGill. He was trained in clinical psychology at McGill, receiving his PhD in 2001. He then went on to postdoctoral training, the longitudinal diagnostic assessment of psychiatric disorders at Yale from 2001 to 2003, In 2003 to 2004, he completed an Udding postdoctoral fellowship for studies in depression at the Jewish General Hospital and at McGill. 2005, he received the Canadian Psychological Association President's New Research Award. The primary goal of Dr. Dunkley's research has been to examine the mechanisms through which perfectionism is a personality vulnerability factor to depression. His research examines stress, coping, and emotional regulation processes that instigate and maintain depressive and anxious symptoms. Dr. Dunkley received the FR2S Chercheur-Boursier Salary Awards. He has obtained grants from federal and provincial agencies and published several articles in respected journals using daily diary and multi-way longitudinal designs. Now, he told me to say this, but I really don't think this does any justice to Dr. Dunkley. I think above all, he's such a kind man, so humble, bright, and amazing colleague. I mean, really, we are in for a treat. So with that.
We no longer see the presenter, and we have, the last slide there.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Soham.
And sorry, also the camera is off on the so you have somehow there you go. Perfect.
Okay, so everybody can hear me. And thank you very much, Soham, for that's a good strategy. Give a humble and slide in the phrase at the end. Okay, so this is my talk. I'll just need to this. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so just talking about New Year's resolutions, you can see the cultural perfectionistic strivings. And so this was an article I read. So often I find articles. And so this was New Year's tips leave me feel as if I'm drinking from a self-improvement fire hose. So you could chip away at all your inadequacies, making increments or across various areas of life, or you can double down on a specific goal, or I considered both and took a nap. And then there's HIIT, that's high intensity interval training, and strength training and yoga. So yoga is right, that's where I do yoga for stiff men. In the Montreal West curling club, Monday two times a week. And yeah, I do a little bit of HIIT, but I think if I did more than yoga, so forget about meditation, mindfulness, deep breathing. If I did more than that, my wife and daughters would kill me because they want me to get a dog. So we need, they wanted us, so if I'm spending more time for myself, so that's probably the next thing is I would get a dog for going and doing mindfulness, formal mindfulness. I like to think I do it informally in my work and that. But I mean, here's a great question. Does anyone have time at all? I wonder, like with all this stuff for self-improvement, between getting 10,000 steps, drinking 8 glasses of water, getting a full night's sleep. And the final thing, like whatever you do, there's always an app, a coach, product, a gizmo, a device, or a template to help you do it better. So that's kind of our cultural. So it's not surprising that perfectionism has been on the rise in the last 3 decades amongst young people. And it kind of comes out of a neoliberal culture that your as good as what you achieve. Your self-worth is dependent on your productivity and achievement. And I think, I mean, Annett as you said, you start off with self-criticism, but then switch to self-compassion. I think that's a very important message is people don't want to really talk about self-criticism. And Neff even said it herself, like her whole talk was about, so I did a 6-hour workshop with her, and it's all about self-criticism. And I asked her about that, and she said, yeah, but if I titled my talks, my workshops, how to stop hating yourself, like nobody's gonna come, you know. So it's got to be self-compassion, like people can handle that better. But I think, but at the same time, it's a problem for people who actually are self-critical. Perfectionist society doesn't really want to talk about it. And so it's associated with a wide range of pathology, such as depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders. It also has a negative impact on the therapeutic process and outcome over time. And so from my end, I say I don't do formal mindfulness, but I study this stuff. I'm sitting at my computer, kind of dealing with pain as, you know, like more painful, not my own pain, but just pain in general, emotional pain. And, you know, so I'm thinking, you know, maybe that's my way of whatever mindfulness or that is. I think about this stuff, but it comes from a place of interest and curiosity and just trying to make meaning and sense of the world. So over the past 50 years, there's been many different constructs coming out of clinical literature, going back to 1974 with self-criticism, autonomy, perfectionism. In the 90s, it's received increasing empirical attention. So I think there's definitely a strong clinical literature behind this that hasn't really been heeded